General Hospital teaser suggests that Rick Lansing may overdose on sleeping pills in the near future. Could Ava Jerome's drug plot go too far? In the August 27th episode, Ava told Lucas Jones she was having difficulties sleeping and that her doctor couldn't see her for a few weeks. Lucas consented to write Ava a sleeping pill prescription, but only for 30 days. Ava convinced Lucas it was wonderful, and we all know why. Ava was clearly lying to get some sleeping medication for Rick, who is being held prisoner for 30 days while the treasure bonds mature. However, there is the possibility of conflict now that we have proof that Rick will be drugged. Ava despises Rick with a burning passion and may let her vindictive emotions take over at some moment. Could this sleeping pill strategy fail? Could Ava become stirred up and attempt to overdose Rick at any point? After all, Rick, like Ava, is a deadly wild card. It's impossible to foresee what Rick would do to Ava once he's free, so she has legitimate concerns that he'll wipe her off the map. Alexis Davis and Christina Corinthos Davis are somewhat protected because they are Molly Lansing Davis family. Rick would not harm them in retribution, but he could definitely harm Ava. This could lead to Ava deciding she should murder Rick before he kills her. Ava may find herself wishing that strike to the head had killed Rick and decide to take matters into her own hands again. Now that we know Ava intends to drug Rick, will she go overboard and cause an overdose? If this is the case, Alexis, Christina, or even a rescuer such as Elizabeth Baldwin may locate Rick in critical condition. Rick may be sent to GH right away depending on how things turn out, so we'll keep you updated on any worrisome developments. Before Rick ended up shackled to a gurney in Alexis' basement, he finally confronted Christina and told her everything he'd been holding inside for months. And he was not wrong. Hearst expressed Rick's rage and despair in a scathing diatribe that Christina deserved. Who didn't want to cheer Rick on as he chastised Christina for almost murdering him when she was actually attempting to kill Ava? It's a credit to Hearst's abilities that we can truly feel sorry for Rick, despite his pond muck actions. Rick also made some excellent points, as Hearst displayed his gentler side by defending his daughter and emphasizing that Molly's baby died as well as Christina's. In truth, the baby was always supposed to be Molly's. When Ava arrived, Hearst's chemistry with Maura West was as strong as ever. Rick returned to sleazy mode, gleefully telling Ava what he had done with all of her money. Rick, it was a bad move since Ava was ready with a paperweight. It wasn't a good week for General Hospital's Rick image. ABC as Ava, Alexis, and Christina deliberated what to do with an unconscious person. Hearst had the difficult task of lying splayed out in Alexis' living room without busting out laughing because the scenes that followed were hilarious. However, when Rick appeared in Alexis' basement moments later, shackled to a stretcher with a ball gag in his mouth, Hearst was aflame. Rick awoke with tangible panic in his eyes and fear in his voice. When Alexis paid him a visit the next morning, Hearst gave us Rick's gradual awareness that Alexis had helped him do this, and she took pleasure in it, reminding Rick that he had done something similar to Carly years before. So far this year, GH fans have freaked out twice, believing Rick would die. If that doesn't demonstrate Hearst's abilities and contributions to the show, we don't know what does. The night was filled with anxiety, the kind that clung to the air like damp fog and refused to lift. Rick lay stretched on the couch in his poorly lit apartment, the faint illumination of a muted television creating shadows across his features. His breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in irregular patterns, and a half-empty bottle of bourbon toppled over on the coffee table next to him. Empty pill bottles, small, orange, and menacing, were scattered over the floor, their contents either consumed in a haze of desperation or something far more terrible. The scene was hectic yet strangely still, as if time had stopped to consider the seriousness of what had occurred. Ava stood in the doorway, her shadow framed by the flickering hallway light and her expression enigmatic. Her hands trembled slightly, contradicting the calm she attempted to exude. Had she intended for this to happen, or had her well-prepared plans gotten out of control? The question hung like a guillotine, harsh and cruel. The story begins weeks earlier, in the muggy expanse of a never-sleeping city, where ambition and betrayal coexist. Rick was a man of contradictions, attractive yet guarded, successful but always on edge. He managed a modest but flourishing digital business that promised to change the way people communicated online, but he rarely talked about it with pride. His days were a flurry of meetings, pitches, and late-night coding sessions, punctuated by black coffee and the occasional whiskey. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially with deadlines looming and investors on his heels. Insomnia had been his regular companion, chewing at his nerves until he needed sleeping drugs to get a few hours of sleep. They began as a necessity, prescribed by a doctor who rarely looked up from his clipboard, but they eventually became a crutch. Rick didn't notice how the doses gradually increased or how quickly the bottles emptied. He didn't notice many things till Ava came into his life. Ava was a captivating woman who could enter into a room and make everyone feel as if they were intruding on her space. She was a consultant hired to help Rick streamline his business, and her keen mind and sharper tongue pierced through the mess of his chaotic workforce. She had a knack of making people trust her, with her charming smile and exact remarks. But there was something else beneath the surface, cunning in the way her gaze lingered on Rick even when she thought he wasn't looking. She noticed his flaws, the restless nights, the eroding edges of his composure, and filed them away like a predator cataloging flaws in its prey. Rick saw her as a lifeline, someone who understood the pressure he was under and listened when he talked about his fear of failure. He didn't wonder why she was always there, giving a drink, a chuckle, or a bottle of medicines when he ran out. He didn't notice the pattern forming. Their relationship was not romantic, yet it teetered on the brink of something unknown. As he moved, the woodland became quieter, with the typical chatter of birds and rustling leaves replaced by an unnerving silence. Jason's hand rested on the knife at his belt, a habit developed over years of training. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but his instincts never faded. He'd seen enough in his travels abroad to understand that hesitancy may cost lives. That's why he hadn't waited for the sheriff or requested favors from old acquaintances. This was personal. Britt was family, and Joss was just as good. Vaughn would save him too, if only to save Britt from losing it. The guy was trouble, but he was her problem. The valley became visible, a jagged furrow in the ground bordered by falling rocks. Jason slowed as his eyes caught a gleam of metal near the edge. He crawled further, remaining low, and discovered a discarded flashlight half buried in the soil. It was Joss's, the one she always carried and had engraved with her initials. His stomach twisted. They'd been here, and they hadn't departed voluntarily. He picked up the flashlight and turned it over in his palms. The lens was fractured, but it still functioned, throwing a faint illumination into the growing dusk. He turned it off and placed it into his backpack. It makes no sense to give away his position. The quarry lay just beyond the ravine, its entrance marked by a rusting gate with faulty hinges. Jason halted and listened. The wind carried a quiet hum, possibly from motors or equipment. The smugglers were still present. He checked his watch and saw that it was 6:47 p.m. The sun was virtually gone, and the temperature was rapidly decreasing. If Britt and the others were out here, exposed, they would not last long. The threat of hypothermia was serious, provided the smugglers hadn't already. He shook his head, forcing the thought away. Focus. Find the trail. Get them out. He slid through the gate and moved quietly along the quarry's edge. The ground was uneven, with damaged machines and piles of gravel. Tire tracks crisscrossed the earth, indicating recent activity. Jason followed them, his gaze searching for any indication of the trio. A fragment of fabric caught his eye, stuck on a sharp piece of rebar. It was blue and torn from Britt's jacket. He yanked it free, his fingers clenching around it. They were close. Too close. The hum became louder, and Jason noticed a cluster of lights in the distance. A makeshift camp, perhaps, or a loading zone. He crouched behind a rusting conveyor belt and peered into the darkness. 3 trucks were parked in a loose circle, their headlights shining through the darkness. Figures glided between them, their voices quiet yet intense. Jason counted 5, too many to face head-on, even with more than a knife and a length of rope. He needed a plan, and he needed it now. That's when he noticed it, a cage, just as Britt's text had described. It was shoved against one of the trucks and partially covered with a tarp. Inside, he could see 3 forms gathered together. His heart leaped, then plummeted. They were alive, but they were imprisoned. Britt's dark hair was identifiable even in low light. Joss was next to her, her head lowered, while Vaughn was slumped against the bars, his face bruised. Jason's blood boiled. He wanted to charge in, dismantle the cage, and haul them out. But it was a suicidal endeavor. He had to be wise. He examined the camp for an opening. The smugglers were distracted, haggling about something, possibly a shipment or the captives. One of them, a wiry man with a shaved head, pointed furiously toward the cage. Another, broader and meaner looking, pushed him back. A power battle, perhaps. That could work to Jason's advantage. If he could create chaos, he might be able to release the trio. But how? He lacked the firepower for a distraction, and the terrain provided minimal protection. His gaze rested on the trucks. If he could deactivate 1 or 2 of them, he might be able to buy some time. Jason came closer, utilizing the shadows to his advantage. The nearest truck was unprotected, with its engine idling. He reached inside his backpack and pulled out a little multi-tool. It wasn't much, but it had the potential to cause harm if used correctly. He slid below the truck, his back pressed against the chilly soil, and discovered the fuel line. A rapid slice, and the pungent odor of gasoline filled the air. He crawled to the next truck and repeated the process. 2 down. The third option was riskier because it was closer to the smugglers, one of whom was pacing nearby. Jason considered his alternatives. He could wait for the person to move, but every second he took meant Britt, Joss, and Vaughn were trapped in that cage. He made his decision. Moving low and fast, he approached the third vehicle and began working. The multi-tool bit into the fuel line, but before he could finish, a shout went up. "Hey! Over there!" Jason froze, his pulse pounding. The pacing smuggler had seen him. Boots pounded the dirt as flashlight beams swept in his direction. He rolled out from under the truck and sprang to his feet. The wiry guy was nearest, holding a pistol. Jason didn't think, he acted. He lunged, bringing the smuggler to the ground before he could aim. The pistol skittered across the dirt, and Jason rammed his fist into the man's jaw, knocking him unconscious. But the others were approaching. Jason snatched the pistol and dashed for shelter, ducking behind a stack of crates. Bullets flew off the metal, and he muttered beneath his breath. This was the roadblock he had been dreading. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and ran out of time. The cage was still 50 yards away, and Britt was saying something he couldn't understand. He peered over the crates to survey the situation. 4 armed smugglers fled, fanning out to flank him. He only had 1 clip in the pistol, maybe 10 bullets, if he was lucky. Not enough. His thoughts raced. The vehicles leaked petrol, and the ground was bone dry. If he could start a fire, it may distract them long enough for him to get into the cage. However, a fire may spread, and the cage was too close to the trucks. He couldn't take the risk. His gaze raced to the quarry's edge, where a sheer drop led into the valley below. If he could entice the smugglers, he might be able to take them out one by one. It was a long shot, but that's all he had. Jason fired 2 shots into the air, and the sound echoed off the quarry walls. The smugglers hesitated before approaching him and shouted. He ran, dodging around piles of rubble and rusting machinery, guiding them to the ravine. His legs burned, and his lungs ached, but he refused to quit. The smugglers followed close behind, their flashlight beams flickering over the ground. He reached the ravine's edge and turned, raising his weapon. When the first smuggler appeared, Jason fired, shooting him in the leg. Not deadly, but enough to slow him down. The others scattered and took cover. He did not have time to celebrate. The cage remained his aim, and he'd only given himself a few seconds. He doubled back, stayed low, and dashed for the trucks. The cage was now unprotected, and the smugglers were too concentrated on catching him. Britt noticed him first, and her eyes widened with relief. "Jason!" she hissed, grasping the bars. Joss stood next to her, her face pallid but resolute. Vaughn was barely aware, his head leaning to the side. "Hold on," Jason said quietly, bringing out his multi-tool. The lock was heavy-duty, but he had damaged it badly. His hands moved quickly, probing at the mechanism and keeping an eye on the shadows. The smugglers would see he had circled back soon enough. The latch clicked as the cage door swung open. Britt stumbled out and threw her arms around him. Joss followed, helping Vaughn get to his feet. He was in horrible shape, but he could walk, just barely. "We need to move," Jason whispered quietly. The smugglers' yells were growing closer. He guided the gathering to the quarry's edge, away from the ravine. The terrain was tough, but this was their last chance. Britt clung to his arm, her breathing ragged. Joss helped Vaughn, who muttered something incomprehensible. Jason kept his pistol ready, watching for movement. He could smell the seeping petrol from where he was. If the smugglers were negligent, the entire area could be destroyed. They arrived at a collection of boulders, and Jason signaled for them to squat. "Stay down," he instructed, looking around the rock. The smugglers gathered around the trucks, their spotlights scouring the area. One of them stood too close to the fuel-soaked ground, his cigarette gleaming in the darkness. Jason's stomach sank. If that cigarette fell to the ground, they would all be in trouble. He needed to get the trio out immediately. "Britt, do you know the trail back to the road?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She nodded, her eyes fiercely focused despite her terror. "Take Joss and Vaughn. Go. Don't stop." She hesitated, but he softly pushed her. "I'll cover you." "How about you?" Joss inquired, her voice trembling. "I'll be right behind you," Jason lied. He could not let them stay. The smugglers were closing in, and the cigarette was like a time bomb. Britt grabbed Joss's hand and drew her toward the trail. Vaughn stumbled after them, his weight impeding their progress. Jason waited until they were out of sight before turning back to the smugglers. He had about 6 shots remaining. Enough to create a distraction but not enough to win. He fired once, twice, aiming at the ground near the trucks. The smugglers dove for shelter while shouting. The cigarette guy was not so fortunate. His light struck the fuel-soaked soil, igniting a whoosh of flame that swallowed the nearest truck. The explosion was smaller than Jason anticipated, but it was sufficient. The smugglers dispersed, and he seized the opportunity, rushing after Britt and the others. The trees swallowed him up as he fled, the fire's brightness dimming behind him. He caught up with the group just as they got to the road, where his truck was parked. Britt was in tears now, her steely veneer crumbling. Joss was shaking, but she kept Vaughn upright. Jason did not stop to check on them, instead, he forced them into the truck, stepped inside, and floored it. The quarry was a blip in the rearview mirror when the second explosion erupted, lighting up the night. They were safe for now. But Jason knew it wasn't over. The smugglers would come looking, and he would be prepared. For Britt, Joss, and Vaughn, for family. Nathan West stepped off the train at South Station, the hum of Boston's bustling bustle wrapping about him like a comfortable coat. The air was crisp, laced with the sharp bite of fall, and the city's skyline loomed in the distance, a mix of old brick and glittering glass that felt both timeless and contemporary. He tightened the strap on his duffel bag, his boots scuffing against the platform as he examined the crowd. Maxie Jones was waiting somewhere in the city, or maybe not. That uncertainty gnawed at him, a subtle pulse of doubt underlying the determination that had gotten him here. It had been months since their last chat, which was a tangle of angry words and hidden regrets. Nathan wasn't one for huge gestures, but something about Maxie constantly pushed him out of his comfort zone, inspiring him to try more and be better. She'd moved to Boston for a fresh start, hoping to land a job at a glossy magazine that promised her a byline and the opportunity to escape the craziness of Port Charles. He'd stayed behind, bound by his responsibilities, his badge, and the weight of a life that never quite let him breathe. But now he was following a feeling he couldn't quite identify. Demonstrating that underlying his deceptive tendencies was a man capable of profound love and sacrifice. Of course, Rick's darker instincts were never hidden for long. Over the years, he became involved in a variety of plots, alliances, and betrayals. Whether it was collaborating with mobsters, manipulating legal issues, or utilizing family connections to advance his interests, Rick's willingness to cross moral lines remained a defining feature of his personality. However, Rick Hurst's characterization ensured that Rick never felt one-dimensional. Even at his most brutal, Rick's purpose was always rooted in anguish, uncertainty, or desperation. Rick's blend of villainy and vulnerability made him one of the most interesting figures in Port Charles history. In addition to his personal difficulties and feuds, Rick's storylines frequently crossed with some of the most significant events on General Hospital. Rick was a constant presence in the show's core conflicts, from mob fights to courtroom confrontations to devastating betrayals. His brilliance made him a useful player, and his unpredictable nature kept fans interested. He could be an ally one minute and then orchestrate a betrayal that shifts the power balance in Port Charles. This constant unpredictability raised the stakes in almost every storyline he touched. Rick Hurst's Emmy-winning performance gave Rick Lansing enormous depth, ensuring that even when the character was absent for extended periods of time, his influence remained. When Rick departed Port Charles, his absence was noticed, and when he returned, he revived old rivalries and relationships, adding new drama to the program. Rick's presence was constantly felt, whether he was plotting to gain power, defending a loved one, or attempting to redeem himself. Perhaps what makes Rick's character so memorable is that he represents the paradoxes and weaknesses that make humans human. He was ambitious yet insecure, loving yet manipulative, principled yet willing to give up those ideals when it suited him. He could be brutal one moment and tender the next. Even if they disagreed with Rick's decisions, viewers could understand his emotions and reasons thanks to Rick Hurst's multi-layered portrayal. Rick Lansing's versatility made him one of the few soap opera characters who could change while keeping faithful to his essential identity. Rick's interactions with others around him gradually shifted over time. His battle with Sonny progressed from open antagonism to periods of uncomfortable collaboration. His relationship with Elizabeth passed through stages of love, betrayal, and bittersweet closure. His relationship with Molly kept him grounded, providing him a sense of purpose beyond his vendettas and ambitions. These shifting tensions enabled Rick Hurst to demonstrate a wide spectrum of emotions, from violent conflicts to quiet, heartbreaking moments that struck a chord with viewers. Rick Lansing is still one of the most popular characters among longtime General Hospital viewers. Fans question his decisions, root for his salvation, and speculate on his possible return to Port Charles. If Rick returns, there are unlimited potential for fresh conflicts and alliances, especially because many of the show's current plots are linked to his past. Rick has unfinished business in Port Charles, whether as a redeemed hero, a crafty enemy, or something in between, and Rick Hurst's return would definitely fuel the drama that fans seek. Rick Hurst's portrayal of Rick Lansing has left an unforgettable impression on General Hospital. Over time, he transformed what could have been a one-note villain into a complex, deeply human persona. Rick's weaknesses made him sympathetic, his brilliance captivating, and his unpredictable actions memorable. Rick's story was a masterclass in soap opera storytelling, with courtroom drama, family betrayals, and unexpected sweetness. While his journey has been fraught with setbacks and turbulence, his lasting impact on the people of Port Charles and the audience is evident. Rick Lansing's legacy is one of intricacy and contradiction, thanks to both his writing and Rick Hurst's outstanding performance. He remains one of those characters who defies easy categorization, straddling the line between hero and villain, victim and offender, brother and antagonist. Whether fans loved him, despised him, or felt both, there's no doubting that Rick helped mold some of the most dramatic and memorable events in General Hospital history. His experience teaches us that redemption is never simple, love is never easy, and family can be both a source of strength and great agony. And as long as Port Charles thrives, Rick's shadow, and the prospect of his return, will remain, waiting for the right moment to unleash new chaos. Rick Lansing's journey on General Hospital has always been a masterclass in balancing power, suffering, and redemption, and Rick Hurst's outstanding portrayal elevated him to one of the most complicated and memorable characters in Port Charles's history. Even after years of twists, betrayals, and shifting alliances, Rick's story feels far from ended, since at his core, he is a man caught between his goals and his desire for love and acceptance. Every decision he made, whether daring, cunning, or painful, was motivated by a strong desire to carve out a place for himself in a world where he was constantly an outsider. Rick's emotional depth lies beneath his sharp intellect and manipulative inclinations, which makes him such an intriguing character. His rivalry with his half-brother, Sonny Corinthos, dominated much of his early story. That rivalry was more than just about power, it was deeply personal, driven by childhood trauma, hatred, and a continual desire to prove himself. Rick desired Sonny's respect as much as he wanted to defeat him, and this tension manifested itself in a series of clashes that molded their lives. Their fights were violent and personal, but beneath the rage, Rick's desire for a genuine connection with Sonny grew achingly evident. Rick Hurst expertly depicted this weakness, allowing viewers to get glimpses of the wounded little kid hiding beneath the ambitious man. But Rick's complexities did not end with familial strife. His sexual relationships added another layer to his personality. His obsession with Elizabeth Weber was one of the most frightening experiences of his life. The famed Panic Room storyline, in which he imprisoned Carly Corinthos as part of his sick scheme to capture Elizabeth's love, was one of General Hospital's most talked-about arcs. It highlighted the lengths Rick was willing to go when love and power intersected. Though his acts were heinous, her subtle acting made Rick seem sympathetic. Viewers could sense the loneliness and despair that drove his decisions. Even after Elizabeth had left him, their connection persisted for years, returning in moments of surprising tenderness and unresolved tension. Rick grew past his early tactics, but he never lost his sharpness. His term as district attorney demonstrated a more calculated, forceful side, with his knowledge and strong manner earning him both respect and dread. Nonetheless, even in his position of power, Rick frequently blurred the distinction between justice and selfish gain. He played both sides when it suited him, whether by making deals with mobsters, using secrets, or manipulating events to gain an edge. This continual contradiction, the lawman who wasn't scared to break the rules, kept viewers on edge, never knowing whether to root for him or against him. Fatherhood revealed another, more grounded side of Rick. His bond with his daughter Molly became one of his most moving qualities, demonstrating his tremendous capacity for love and protection. Despite his weaknesses, Rick really wanted to provide Molly with the stability and care that he had never received as a child. Those quieter, more emotional moments allowed viewers to connect with him on a deeper level, demonstrating that beyond his deceitful demeanor was a guy capable of genuine affection. Even now, Rick Lansing's name provokes heated debate among admirers. He is a character that exists in shades of gray, embodying both villainy and vulnerability in equal measure. If he returns to Port Charles, he will face a limitless number of possibilities, including renewed conflict with Sonny, a potential reconciliation with Elizabeth, complicated dynamics with Alexis and Molly, and new rivalries that might shake up the entire city. Rick Hurst added a distinct intensity to Rick Lansing, making him memorable long after his last appearance. Rick's legacy is based on nuanced storytelling, emotional depth, and the impression that he is always on the verge of redemption or self-destruction. That unpredictability is what keeps people interested, and his probable return will definitely reignite some of the most dramatic drama General Hospital has ever witnessed.